Homeless girl stops millionaire. If you fly, you'll crash and die. What happens next is terrifying. Thunder crackled across the New York sky as rain pounded mercilessly against the windshield of Thomas Bennett's car. His knuckles white against the steering wheel, he glanced anxiously at his wife Emma in the passenger seat, then at their sleeping 7-year-old daughter Sarah through the rearview mirror. "We have to tell James," Emma whispered, clutching a manila envelope. "These documents prove everything. Michael's been embezzling millions, and he's using the company's charity foundation to launder money." Thomas nodded grimly. "I know. I still can't believe Michael would do this. He was my best friend, Emma. We grew up together." Suddenly, bright headlights flooded their car from behind. The SUV was approaching fast too fast. Emma's eyes widened with fear. "Thomas, they're not slowing down." Thomas tried to accelerate, but the rain-slicked roads made it treacherous. The SUV rammed them from behind, sending their car fishtailing. Sarah jolted awake, screaming. "Hold on," Thomas shouted, fighting for control of the vehicle. Through the mirror, he caught a glimpse of the driver, a face he knew all too well. "Michael, please," he whispered. The SUV struck again, harder. Their car spun violently, breaking through the guardrail. Emma reached back towards Sarah, tears streaming down her face. "Baby, we love you so much." The world turned upside down as their car plunged down the embankment. Metal screamed against rock. Glass shattered. Sarah's terrified screams pierced the night. Above, the SUV's headlights illuminated the scene briefly before turning away, leaving only darkness and the sound of rain. Hours later, when police found the wreckage, they discovered a miracle among the tragedy. 7-year-old Sarah Bennett was alive, protected by her parents' final act of love. But she remembered nothing of that night, nothing of the accident that took her parents, nothing of the manila envelope that disappeared into the rain-swollen river. 5 years later, on a busy New York street, destiny would bring Sarah face to face with James Crawford, the man her parents had tried to reach that fatal night. Neither of them knew it yet, but their chance encounter would set in motion a chain of events that would uncover long-buried secrets, expose a web of corruption, and test the limits of courage, love, and justice. For now, Sarah walked home from school, her worn backpack heavy on her thin shoulders, unaware that she was about to save the life of the one man who could help her uncover the truth about her parents' death. And somewhere in a towering office building, James Crawford reviewed acquisition reports, not knowing that his life was about to be saved by a little girl who would change everything. The stage was set. The players were in position. And the truth, hidden for so long in the darkness, was finally ready to come to light. If you found this story touching, please consider subscribing. Your support helps me create more meaningful content that explores the depths of human emotions and life's profound moments. Sarah Bennett lived with her grandmother Martha in a cramped one-room apartment on the outskirts of Brooklyn, where the neighborhood's decay mirrored their own struggles. At 12 years old, Sarah's small frame carried both the weight of poverty and the invisible burden of her parents' tragic death 5 years ago. Her unruly brown hair and worn second-hand clothes made her an easy target for schoolyard bullies, but her eyes held a determination that refused to be dimmed by circumstance. Martha Bennett, once a respected elementary school teacher, now cleaned houses despite her arthritic hands and failing health. At 65, her face bore deep lines of worry, but her love for Sarah gave her the strength to persist. Every morning she'd wake before dawn to prepare Sarah's meager breakfast, carefully dividing their dwindling food supplies to ensure her granddaughter never went completely hungry. Their apartment told the story of their hardship. Water stains marked the ceiling where the roof leaked during rainstorms. A single bed served as Sarah's sleeping space, while Martha took the worn couch. The kitchenette consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge that hummed loudly through the night. A folding table doubled as their dining area and Sarah's homework station. The walls, however, held treasures photos of Thomas and Emma Bennett, Sarah's parents, in happier times. Their smiling faces watched over the small family, a reminder of what they'd lost. Sarah often sat beneath these photos, doing her homework or reading borrowed library books, finding comfort in her parents' frozen smiles. Despite their circumstances, Sarah excelled at school, inheriting her grandmother's love of learning. She'd often bring home perfect test scores, though the papers were crumpled from being hidden in her backpack to avoid drawing attention. The local library became her sanctuary, where she'd spend hours reading about far-off places and different lives, dreaming of a future beyond their struggling neighborhood. Martha's pride in Sarah was matched only by her fear for their future. Each month brought new challenges: rising rent, mounting medical bills, and the constant threat of eviction. She'd pawned her wedding ring months ago to pay for Sarah's sole supplies, though she told her granddaughter it was simply lost. At night when Sarah slept, Martha would count their remaining dollars, trying to stretch them impossibly further. Their neighbors knew them as the quiet pair who always had a kind word despite their own troubles. Sarah would help elderly Mrs. Rodriguez with her groceries, while Martha shared their meager meals with the homeless veteran who lived in the alley behind their building. Their poverty hadn't hardened their hearts; if anything, it had made them more aware of others' suffering. The social workers who occasionally checked on them saw only the surface: a clean apartment, a well-behaved child, a seemingly coping grandmother. They didn't see Martha's hidden pill bottles, the night she went without dinner so Sarah could eat, or the way she muffled her coughs to avoid worrying her granddaughter. They didn't notice how Sarah watched her grandmother with growing concern, sensing the weight of secrets her young shoulders weren't meant to bear. Yet amidst their struggles, there was love. Every night, Martha would tell Sarah stories about her parents, how her father could make anyone laugh, how her mother's smile could light up a room. These stories were their most precious possessions, keeping the memory of Thomas and Emma alive in their small, struggling world. But fate was about to intervene in their lives, bringing them face to face with a man whose wealth and power would seem to belong to another world entirely. Neither Sarah nor Martha could have imagined how a single act of courage would set in motion events that would uncover long-buried truths and challenge the very foundations of their existence. For now, they continued their daily routine, surviving one day at a time, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Tomorrow would bring a chance encounter that would shatter their carefully constructed world of quiet dignity and resilient poverty, forcing them to confront both the shadows of the past and the possibilities of the future. James Crawford stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline without really seeing it. At 45, his success as CEO of Crawford Enterprises had brought him everything money could buy. Yet his life felt oddly hollow. His perfectly tailored suit and carefully maintained appearance masked a deep loneliness that even his billions couldn't fill. Each morning followed the same routine. His personal chef would prepare a breakfast he barely touched, his driver would navigate through Manhattan traffic while he reviewed reports, and his assistant would manage his meticulously scheduled day. The Crawford Tower, a gleaming monument to his success, had become both his kingdom and his prison. Today, like every day, his desk held acquisition reports, charity foundation documents, and merger proposals. But James found himself distracted by the silver-framed photo hidden in his desk drawer, the only personal item in his otherwise sterile office. It showed a younger version of himself with his brother Thomas, both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. Thomas had died 5 years ago in what was ruled a tragic accident, though James had always harbored doubts. The loss of his brother had changed James profoundly. While he maintained his reputation as a ruthless businessman, he had quietly established numerous charitable foundations, though few knew these efforts were driven by guilt over not being there when Thomas needed him most. His brother had tried to reach him the night of the accident, leaving urgent messages James had been too busy to answer. His executive team knew him as demanding but fair. His business rivals feared his strategic brilliance, and the press portrayed him as the archetypal corporate titan. None of them saw the man who spent sleepless nights reading old emails from his brother, searching for clues he might have missed. None knew how he visited Thomas's grave every Sunday, speaking to the headstone about deals and decisions, seeking counsel from a ghost. The only person who glimpsed his humanity was Eleanor, his elderly housekeeper, who had known him since childhood. She alone saw how he kept his brother's old leather jacket hanging in his closet, how he would sometimes stand before it late at night, lost in thought. She witnessed his rare moments of vulnerability, though she never spoke of them. Despite his wealth and power, James lived simply, almost monastically. His vast penthouse apartment felt more like a hotel suite than a home, its pristine surfaces untouched by personal mementos or signs of life. He dined alone most nights, working late into the evening, the city lights his only company. His closest relationship was with his chief financial officer, Michael Henderson, who had been Thomas's best friend before the accident. Michael had become James's right hand, helping him navigate both business and personal loss. Yet lately, something about Michael's behavior had begun to trouble James' subtle inconsistencies, unexplained absences, and a growing nervousness that seemed out of character. What James didn't know was that his carefully controlled world was about to be upended by a chance encounter with a 12-year-old girl whose eyes would remind him startlingly of his lost brother. This meeting would force him to confront not only his past but also the carefully buried secrets within his own company. For now, though, he stood at his window, a solitary figure in his glass tower, unaware that destiny was about to intervene in the form of a child's courage and a long-hidden truth. The empire he had built would soon be shaken to its foundations, and the real meaning of wealth, power, and family would be redefined in ways he could never have imagined. Michael Henderson exuded power from his corner office on the 49th floor of Crawford Tower. At 50, his silver hair and designer suits projected an image of trustworthiness that had served him well in deceiving everyone around him. As chief financial officer of Crawford Enterprises, he had spent years building an elaborate web of financial fraud, hidden behind a facade of charitable initiatives and corporate success. His office walls displayed photographs of him with world leaders and celebrities, carefully curated to showcase his influence. But hidden in his personal safe lay the real evidence of his true nature: falsified documents, offshore account details, and a single photograph from 20 years ago showing him, Thomas Bennett, and James Crawford in their college days, arms around each other, smiling with the innocence of youth. That photograph was his personal reminder of how far he'd come and what he'd sacrificed to get there. He'd orchestrated Thomas's death 5 years ago when his old friend had discovered his embezzlement scheme, a fact that never disturbed his sleep. Power, he believed, belonged to those willing to take it, regardless of the cost. His criminal empire operated with sophisticated precision. He'd created a network of shell companies through Crawford's charitable foundation, laundering millions while maintaining the appearance of philanthropic work. The same foundation that publicly built schools in developing countries secretly funded his luxurious lifestyle and growing power base. Each morning, Michael arrived at work early to review his illegal operations before the office filled. His assistant, carefully chosen for her unquestioning loyalty through generous compensation, kept visitors at bay while he conducted his real business. His computer contained 2 sets of books, one for Crawford Enterprises and one for his shadow empire. The irony of using James Crawford's charitable impulses, born from grief over Thomas's death, to further his illegal activities brought Michael a perverse satisfaction. He'd manipulated James's guilt and grief masterfully, becoming both his closest advisor and the architect of his eventual downfall. Recent developments, however, had begun to concern him. James's increasing interest in reviewing the Foundation's activities threatened to expose inconsistencies. Worse, he'd noticed James's growing preoccupation with his brother's accident, raising the possibility that his carefully constructed facade might crack. His network of paid informants had also reported something troubling Thomas's daughter Sarah, whom he'd thought safely buried in poverty with her grandmother, had been seen near Crawford Tower. The girl's existence was a loose end he'd never quite managed to tie up, protected as she was by her convenient amnesia about the night of the accident. Michael's office held one more secret, a hidden panel behind his desk concealing a monitor displaying surveillance feeds. He watched James Crawford's office, Sarah's school, Martha Bennett's apartment building. Knowledge was power, and Michael Henderson never left anything to chance. Yet despite his seeming invulnerability, a trace of unease had begun to creep into his carefully ordered world. The same instincts that had helped him climb to power now whispered that something was about to change. The pieces on his chessboard were moving in unexpected ways. What Michael couldn't know was that his carefully constructed house of cards would soon begin to fall, triggered by the simple act of a child saving a life. The powers he'd accumulated through decades of manipulation and murder would prove useless against the determination of a 12-year-old girl and the awakening conscience of a grieving brother. For now, though, he sat in his leather chair, reviewing his empire's books, unaware that karma was about to demand payment for his crimes in ways he could never have anticipated. The game he thought he controlled was about to change, and the players he'd manipulated would soon become the instruments of his downfall. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear over New York City. Sarah Bennett hurried along the crowded sidewalk, her worn backpack heavy with library books. She'd stayed too long at the library studying, and now she was late for her shift helping old Mrs. Rodriguez, with housework, the extra $5 she earned, would help buy her grandmother's medicine. The streets near Crawford Tower were always busy at this hour, filled with executives and office workers rushing to their destinations. Sarah felt invisible among them, just another shadow in their peripheral vision. She'd learned to navigate these streets carefully, knowing which corners offered the best opportunities for collecting discarded cans and which cafes sometimes gave away day-old bread. As she approached the towering glass building, she noticed a man in an expensive suit engaged in an intense phone conversation. Something about his distracted demeanor and his proximity to the busy street made her uneasy. He was gesturing animatedly, completely oblivious to his surroundings. "No, absolutely not acceptable," the man was saying, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Tell Robinson the merger proceeds on our terms, or we'll walk. I don't care about his board's concerns." Sarah saw it before anyone else, the delivery truck running the red light, its driver distracted by something in his cab. The suited man, still absorbed in his call, stepped off the curb directly into its path. Time seemed to slow down as Sarah's body moved on instinct. Without conscious thought, she dropped her backpack and lunged forward. Her small hands grabbed the man's suit jacket with surprising strength, yanking him backward. They both tumbled onto the sidewalk as the truck roared past, missing them by inches. The man's phone clattered across the concrete, his call forgotten in the chaos of the moment. For a few seconds they lay there on the sidewalk, Sarah's heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The man's eyes, the striking blue that reminded her of someone she couldn't quite place, were wide with shock as he stared at her. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Then, louder, "You saved my life." A crowd had gathered around them, murmuring and pointing. Someone helped them to their feet. Sarah noticed her knee was bleeding through her threadbare jeans, her only pair, and fought back tears. The suited man was brushing off his expensive clothes, but his eyes never left her face. "Are you all right?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I'm James Crawford. Please, let me help you. You're hurt." Sarah's eyes widened at the name. Even in her neighborhood, everyone knew about James Crawford, the billionaire CEO. She suddenly felt very small and out of place, acutely aware of her worn clothes and scraped knee. "I'm fine," she mumbled, reaching for her backpack. "I need to go. I'm late." "Wait," James called, but Sarah was already limping away, disappearing into the crowd. She'd learned long ago that rich people's gratitude often came with complications her grandmother couldn't afford. James stood on the sidewalk, watching the small figure vanish into the sea of pedestrians. Something about the girl's eyes haunted him, a familiar look he couldn't quite place. His driver appeared, concerned about the commotion, but James barely heard his questions. Behind her, he told his security team, pulling out a fresh phone. "That girl just saved my life. I need to know who she is." What James couldn't know was that this chance encounter would unlock a chain of events that would unravel everything he thought he knew about his brother's death. The girl who had just saved his life was the key to a mystery he hadn't even known existed. Sarah, meanwhile, hurried through the streets, fighting back tears of pain from her injured knee. She was now very late for Mrs. Rodriguez, and the $5 she desperately needed seemed lost. Her grandmother's medicine would have to wait another day. But as she limped home, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Those blue eyes had stirred something in her memory, a fragment of a dream, or perhaps a nightmare that she couldn't quite grasp. Above them both, in his corner office, Michael Henderson watched the security footage of the incident with growing concern. The girl's face, so like her father's, told him that the past he'd tried to bury was about to resurface. He reached for his phone, knowing that measures would need to be taken. Fortune had preserved his secret 5 years ago. He couldn't rely on luck a second time. James Crawford couldn't shake the image of the girl who had saved his life. Her worn clothes, the frightened look in her eyes, and most disturbingly, something hauntingly familiar about her features consumed his thoughts. His security team had tracked her to a dilapidated apartment building on the outskirts of Brooklyn, and now he stood outside, feeling strangely nervous. The building's facade was crumbling, with graffiti covering the lower walls and several windows boarded up. A broken security door creaked in the wind. The lobby's fluorescent lights flickered weakly, casting shadows on walls stained with decades of neglect. This was a different world from his penthouse suite and corporate boardrooms. Following his security team's report, he climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, the elevator having been out of service for months. Each step revealed new signs of decay: missing handrails, cracked steps, the musty smell of old carpet. He found himself wondering how many other stories of struggle and survival these walls contained. Apartment 4C's door was scratched and worn, but someone had placed a small potted plant beside it, a touch of hope in the darkness. James knocked, adjusting his tie nervously. After a moment, an elderly woman opened the door, her eyes widening in recognition. "Mr. Crawford," Martha Bennett's voice trembled slightly. "What brings someone like you to our home?" Before he could answer, he caught sight of the girl from that morning. She sat at a small folding table, attempting to bandage her injured knee. Their eyes met, and James felt that same strange jolt of recognition. "Please," he said softly, "I had to thank you properly. May I come in?" The apartment's interior stopped him in his tracks. It was clean but desperately poor, a single room serving as bedroom, living room, and kitchen. Photos on the wall caught his attention: a younger Martha, a couple he couldn't quite make out, and a baby he assumed was the girl who had saved him. "I'm Sarah," the girl said quietly, watching him with wary eyes. "You didn't need to come." James took in the scene: the hot plate serving as a kitchen, the worn couch clearly doubling as a bed, the carefully mended curtains. On the table lay scattered pills and medical bills. He noticed how Martha tried to discreetly slide them out of sight. "Sarah," he said, kneeling to her level, "you risked your life to save mine. That makes you very special. Please, let me help you and your grandmother." Martha started to protest, but a coughing fit interrupted her. James noticed how Sarah immediately tensed, worry crossing her young face. The grandmother's hands, he realized, showed signs of arthritis and years of hard labor. "Mrs. Bennett," he said gently, "I understand pride. But sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, it's giving someone else the chance to do what's right." He looked around the apartment again, this time noticing the library books, Sarah's perfect homework scores on the wall, the carefully maintained family photos. This wasn't just poverty, this was dignity in the face of hardship. "I don't want charity," Martha said firmly, though her voice wavered. "We manage." "It's not charity," James replied. "Your granddaughter saved my life. Let me at least ensure she doesn't have to worry about basic necessities. Let me help with your medical care." Sarah watched this exchange silently, her eyes moving between her grandmother and the billionaire standing in their tiny apartment. James noticed how she unconsciously positioned herself between them, protective of her grandmother despite her youth. "Why?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice clear and direct. "Why do you care?" The question caught James off guard. Looking at her, he again felt that nagging sense of familiarity. Because he said slowly, "Someone once told me that we're measured not by what we have, but by what we do for others." Martha's expression softened slightly. "That sounds like something my son Thomas would have said." The name hit James like a physical blow. "Thomas," he whispered, his mind racing. "Thomas Bennett." But before Martha could respond, Sarah suddenly swayed, her face pale. The excitement and stress of the day, combined with her injury and what James suspected was inadequate nutrition, had caught up with her. James caught her before she could fall, and in that moment of contact, looking at her face up close, everything clicked into place. The familiar eyes, the set of her jaw, the way she carried herself, she was the spitting image of his brother Thomas at that age. His heart pounding, James helped Sarah to the couch while Martha hurried to get water. The implications overwhelmed him. Could it be possible? Was this his brother's daughter? And if so, what did that mean about everything he thought he knew about Thomas's death? Looking at Sarah's pale face, James made a silent vow. Whatever the truth was, he would protect this child. He owed her not only his life, but perhaps something far more profound, a chance to right the wrongs of the past. The connection between Sarah's parents' death and Crawford Enterprises began to unravel like a loose thread pulled from an old sweater. In his private office late that night, James pored over company records from 5 years ago, his computer screen casting a pale glow over scattered documents and old photographs. Thomas and Emma Bennett's accident report lay open on his desk. The official investigation had ruled it a tragic accident, a car losing control, a rain-slicked road, plunging down an embankment. But something about the timing had always bothered James. The accident had occurred the night before Thomas was scheduled to meet with him about urgent company business. James pulled up the company's financial records from that period. Thomas had been the senior accountant in charge of reviewing charitable foundation expenditures. 3 days before his death, he had flagged several transactions for review. The files had been subsequently cleared by Michael Henderson, who took over the investigation after Thomas's death. As he dug deeper, patterns began to emerge. Large sums of money moving through the foundation, complex transfers between shell companies, documentation that seemed perfect on the surface but showed inconsistencies under closer scrutiny. Thomas had seen something that had cost him his life. A knock at his door startled him. Michael Henderson entered, his face showing concern. "James, it's past midnight. What are you doing here so late?" James quickly minimized the screens on his computer. "Just reviewing some old files. Actually, Michael, I've been meaning to ask you about the Bennett accident. You were Thomas's best friend. Did he ever mention any concerns about the foundation's accounts?" Michael's expression remained neutral, but James noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. Nothing specific. Thomas was always detail-oriented, sometimes to a fault. Why the sudden interest? "I met someone today," James said carefully, watching Michael's reaction. "A young girl named Sarah Bennett, Thomas's daughter." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken tension. Michael's hand tightened imperceptibly on the back of the chair he was holding. "The girl who saved you from the truck. That's quite a coincidence." "Is it?" James asked quietly. "Or is it something more?" Before Michael could respond, James's phone buzzed. A text from his private investigator found something. Office safe. T's last day. Security footage. Michael James said, standing, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about what really happened 5 years ago." But Michael was already moving toward the door. "It's late, James. Whatever this is about, it can wait until morning. Get some rest, you've had a shocking day." After Michael left, James sat in silence, his mind racing. He pulled out the photo of Sarah he'd taken earlier that day, placing it beside an old picture of Thomas. The resemblance was undeniable. But it wasn't just their physical similarities, it was the same determined look, the same quiet strength in their eyes. Opening his safe, James retrieved a sealed envelope Thomas had given him weeks before the accident. "If anything happens to me," Thomas had said, "open this." James had never opened it, too consumed by grief and guilt. Now, with trembling fingers, he broke the seal. Inside, he found a USB drive and a handwritten note. "James, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. What I've discovered about the Foundation goes deeper than you can imagine. Michael isn't who you think he is. The proof is on this drive. Protect my family. Thomas." James plugged in the drive, but the files were encrypted. He would need help to access them, but he couldn't trust anyone within the company. As he contemplated his next move, security footage from the lobby caught his attention. Michael was leaving the building, phone pressed to his ear, his face set in grim determination. A chill ran down James's spine. By asking about Sarah, he had inadvertently put her and Martha in danger. Michael had maintained his perfect facade for 5 years. He wouldn't risk exposure now. James grabbed his coat and car keys, already dialing his security team. "Get to the Bennett apartment immediately," he ordered, running for the elevator. "And find me everything you can about Michael Henderson's activities the night Thomas Bennett died." As he raced through the darkened city streets, James's mind whirled with implications. His closest friend and advisor might be a murderer. His brother's death might have been orchestrated within his own company. And an innocent girl who had saved his life might now be in danger because of him. The rain began to fall, just as it had on the night Thomas died. James pressed harder on the accelerator, praying he wouldn't be too late again. Sometimes, he realized, the greatest dangers come not from strangers, but from those we trust most. And sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms, like a 12-year-old girl with her father's eyes and her mother's courage. Martha Bennett sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, her hands trembling as she held the doctor's diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The words seemed to mock her from the crisp white paper. 6 months to live, maybe less without aggressive treatment she could never afford. Sarah sat beside her, homework spread across her lap, unaware that her world was about to shatter again. Martha watched her granddaughter's concentrated expression, so like her father's, and felt her heart breaking. She'd promised Thomas and Emma she would protect their daughter, but now her own body was betraying that promise. Mrs. Bennett, a nurse, appeared with more forms to fill out. Martha noticed how the woman's eyes lingered sympathetically on Sarah before quietly asking, "Have you considered your options? There are social services." No, Martha cut her off firmly, though her voice trembled. "She stays with me. The thought of Sarah in foster care, alone and vulnerable, was unbearable." Later that evening, in their tiny apartment, Martha watched Sarah preparing their meager dinner soup stretched with extra water and stale bread. She hadn't told her granddaughter about the diagnosis yet. How do you tell a child who's already lost so much that she's about to lose everything again? The pain struck suddenly, causing Martha to double over. She'd been hiding these attacks for weeks, but this one was worse. Sarah was at her side instantly, her young face etched with worry. "Grandma? Should I call someone?" Mr. Crawford gave us his number. "No, sweetheart," Martha managed through clenched teeth. "Just help me to the couch." But Sarah was already dialing, her voice small but determined as she spoke into the phone. "Mr. Crawford? It's Sarah. Something's wrong with Grandma. Please help." Within 20 minutes, James Crawford's private doctor arrived, followed shortly by James himself. Martha tried to protest, but the pain made resistance impossible. As the doctor examined her, James took Sarah into the hallway. Through the thin walls, Martha could hear Sarah's muffled sobs as James gently explained what was happening. "It's not fair," Sarah cried. "First Mom and Dad, now Grandma? Why does everyone leave me?" Martha closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. The doctor touched her hand gently. "Mrs. Bennett, with immediate treatment, we might be able to extend." "I can't afford it," Martha whispered. "And Sarah needs me. I have to stay strong for her." James re-entered the apartment, his face set with determination. "The treatment is covered, Martha. All of it. I'm not taking no for an answer." "Mr. Crawford, I can't accept." "This isn't charity," he interrupted. "This is family. I believe Sarah is my niece, which makes you family too. Let me help you fight this for Sarah's sake, if not your own." Martha looked at Sarah, who stood in the doorway, her eyes red from crying but filled with desperate hope. In that moment, Martha saw not just her granddaughter, but the legacy of her son and daughter-in-law. Sarah needed her grandmother to fight, to stay alive, to keep their small family intact. "All right," Martha whispered, reaching for Sarah's hand. "I'll fight." The next few days passed in a blur of hospital admissions, tests, and consultations. James insisted on the best oncologists, the most advanced treatments, but even with all his resources, the prognosis remained grave. What none of them knew was that Michael Henderson was watching these developments with growing concern. Martha Bennett's illness complicated his plans. Her death might have solved one problem, but James's involvement created new ones. She knew too much about the past, even if she didn't realize it yet. As Martha began her first round of chemotherapy, Sarah rarely left her side. The girl would do her homework in the hospital room, read aloud from library books, or simply hold her grandmother's hand through the worst of the nausea and pain. James visited daily, bringing comfortable blankets, real food to replace the hospital meals, and most importantly, hope. Martha watched the growing bond between him and Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. She needed to stay alive long enough to tell them both the truth about the night Thomas died, about what she had seen, about the secret she'd kept for 5 years to protect her granddaughter. But for now, Martha focused on surviving one day at a time, gathering her strength for the battles ahead. Because this wasn't just about her anymore, it was about justice, truth, and protecting the people she loved. The cancer might be killing her body, but it had awakened a fierce determination in her spirit. She would live long enough to see the truth come to light, no matter the cost. The evidence of corporate corruption surfaced like bodies rising from a deep lake. James sat in his home office at midnight, surrounded by paper trails and digital breadcrumbs that painted a horrifying picture. The encrypted files from Thomas's USB drive had finally been decoded, revealing years of systematic fraud orchestrated through the Crawford Foundation. Spreadsheets detailed millions laundered through fake charitable projects. Fabricated receipts showed schools and hospitals that never existed. Behind each transaction, Michael Henderson's signature appeared like a recurring nightmare. But most disturbing were the emails between Michael and various offshore accounts, discussing removing obstacles and permanent solutions. James's hands shook as he opened the final file security footage from the night Thomas died. The grainy video showed his brother working late, clearly agitated. Michael entered the frame, their conversation becoming heated. Thomas gestured at his computer screen, pointing at something. Michael's face transformed from friendly concern to cold fury. The timestamp matched perfectly with Thomas's last phone call to James, a call he'd been too busy to answer. "James, it's about Michael, the foundation. It's worse than we thought. I need to show you something. Please call me back. Be careful who you trust." A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Eleanor, his housekeeper, entered with coffee. "Sir, you should rest. You've been at this for hours." James rubbed his tired eyes. "Eleanor, you've known Michael as long as I have. Did you ever notice anything strange?" The elderly woman hesitated. "The night Mr. Thomas died, Mr. Henderson came here very late. His clothes. I noticed dark stains. He used your private bathroom to change. I found the clothes later in the garbage, but I thought—" She trailed off, horror dawning on her face. James's phone buzzed. A text from his private investigator found Thomas's missing briefcase, hidden in Henderson's lake house. Sending photos now. The images loaded water-damaged documents, old photographs, and a sealed envelope addressed to James. Inside he found a letter written in his brother's hand. "James, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Michael has been stealing millions through the foundation, but it's worse, he's using our charity projects to cover arms dealing and drug trafficking. I have proof. I tried to confront him, give him a chance to come clean. He threatened Emma and Sarah. I have to protect them. The complete evidence is hidden where we used to fish as kids. Remember the old oak tree? Look beneath. I'm sorry I kept this from you. I thought I could handle it. If anything happens to me, protect my family. Love. Thomas. Thomas. James's vision blurred with tears. His brother had tried to do the right thing, and it had cost him everything. Now Sarah and Martha were in danger too. His security team's report arrived next. Michael had withdrawn massive sums recently. Private jet fueled and waiting. Multiple fake passports found in his home safe. He was planning to run. But what truly chilled James's blood was the last piece of information. Michael had hired someone to deal with Martha's hospital care. A medical accident was being arranged. James reached for his phone, dialing Martha's hospital room. No answer. Sarah's cell phone straight to voicemail. The private security he'd posted at their door wasn't responding either. Panic rising, he called hospital security. "This is James Crawford. I need an immediate check on Martha Bennett's room." The response made his blood run cold. "Sir, a Dr. Anderson just took Mrs. Bennett for some urgent tests. Her granddaughter went with them." "There is no Dr. Anderson on my approved list." James was already running for his car. Lock down the hospital. No one leaves. Racing through the dark streets, James's mind tormented him with possibilities. Had he acted too slowly? Had his investigation tipped Michael off? Would he lose Sarah and Martha just as he'd lost Thomas? His car phone rang Michael's number. James activated the recorder. "Where are they?" Michael's voice was eerily calm. "Where you'll never find them, old friend. Just like Thomas, you should have stayed out of it, focused on running the company. Some truths are better left buried." "They're innocent, Michael. Sarah's just a child. A child who's seen too much. Like father, like daughter, some people just can't mind their own business. Goodbye, James. Don't bother looking for us." The line went dead, leaving James with the echo of his own failure. He'd trusted the wrong person, ignored his brother's warnings, and now history was repeating itself in the worst possible way. But this time would be different. This time he wouldn't be too late. This time he would save what remained of his family, no matter the cost. The hospital loomed ahead, its windows blazing like eyes in the night. Somewhere inside, the final act of a tragedy 5 years in the making was about to unfold. Michael Henderson's threats and manipulation reached new heights as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. From his private command center, he watched multiple surveillance feeds showing James's frantic race to the hospital. A thin smile crossed his face as he initiated the next phase of his plan. "Begin the transfer," he ordered through a secure line. "And make sure our friend in the hospital understands no loose ends." In Martha's hospital room, the the fake Dr. Anderson, actually a hired operative, prepared a syringe while two disguised men posing as orderlies stood guard. Sarah, sensing something wrong, clutched her grandmother's hand tightly. "This isn't the usual medicine," Martha said weakly, her years of motherly instinct warning her of danger. "Where's Dr. Patterson?" "Emergency consultation," the fake doctor replied smoothly. "This is just a mild sedative for the transfer." Sarah's eyes darted between the men, recognizing the predatory stance she'd seen in schoolyard bullies. Something was very wrong. Her phone had mysteriously stopped working, and the regular security guards James had posted were nowhere to be seen. "I need to use the bathroom," Sarah announced suddenly, her voice steady despite her fear. The men exchanged glances before one nodded curtly. "Make it quick, kid." In the bathroom, Sarah quickly climbed onto the toilet, pushed open the small window, and squeezed through a trick she'd learned from years of avoiding bullies. The night air hit her face as she carefully navigated the narrow ledge, her heart pounding. Meanwhile, Michael orchestrated a deeper deception. He released doctored financial records to the media, painting James as the mastermind behind the foundation's fraud. Anonymous tips suggested James was mentally unstable, obsessed with his dead brother, and potentially dangerous to Sarah and Martha. So his assistant interrupted. "The police are asking questions about the real Dr. Patterson's disappearance." "Can't plant the evidence in James's car," Michael ordered. "Make it look like he's responsible. By morning, he'll be the prime suspect in multiple crimes." Back at the hospital, Martha watched in horror as the fake doctor approached with the syringe. She knew these might be her last moments to protect her granddaughter. With strength born of desperate love, she suddenly yanked out her IV, setting off the medical alarms. "Run, Sarah," she screamed, hoping her granddaughter had already escaped. "They're not doctors." The chaos that erupted was immediate. Nurses rushed in, the fake medical team struggled to maintain control, and hospital security responded to the alarms. In the confusion, Martha managed to press the emergency call button James had given her. But Michael, watching the scene unravel through surveillance, cursed and grabbed his phone. "Finish it now. We're out of time." But he had underestimated the power of a child's determination and a grandmother's love. Sarah had managed to reach the hospital security office, gasping out her story to the startled guards, and Martha, despite her weakness, was fighting with every ounce of strength she had left. James burst into the hospital lobby just as police sirens filled the air. His private security team, having finally broken through the communication jamming, converged on the building from all directions. In his command center, Michael watched his plans dissolve into chaos. His phone buzzed with news he never expected. His offshore accounts were being frozen, his escape route had been compromised, and most disturbing of all, Sarah Bennett had somehow accessed the hospital's public address system. The girl's voice echoed through every corridor. "Michael Henderson killed my parents. He's trying to kill my grandmother. Don't let him escape." The simplicity and power of a child's truth cut through years of elaborate deception. Hospital staff, security guards, and patients all became instant witnesses, making cover-up impossible. Michael's face contorted with rage as he realized his own hubris had been his undoing. He had planned for every contingency except the most basic one, the fierce courage of a 12-year-old girl. As police surrounded the hospital and James raced toward Martha's room, Michael made his final desperate move. But he would find that even his backup plans had been compromised by the very people he'd tried to destroy. The night would end with multiple arrests, shocking revelations, and the beginning of justice long delayed. But more importantly, it would mark the moment when Sarah Bennett, like her father before her, refused to be silenced by fear and power. In her hospital room, Martha smiled weakly as she heard her granddaughter's voice over the speakers. Even facing death, she felt a fierce pride. Sarah had her father's courage and her mother's spirit, a combination that had finally brought truth to light. The mighty Michael Henderson, who had built an empire on lies and murder, was about to learn that sometimes the greatest power lies not in wealth or corruption, but in the simple, unbreakable bonds of family and truth. While James investigated the growing web of corruption, he found himself drawn deeper into Sarah and Martha's lives. His morning routine now included stopping by their apartment, bringing fresh groceries and checking on Martha's health. Sarah gradually warmed to his presence, though shadows of wariness still lingered in her eyes. One morning, as Martha underwent her chemotherapy treatment, James took Sarah to Central Park. Watching her feed the ducks, he noticed how she unconsciously mirrored Thomas's mannerisms, the slight tilt of her head, the thoughtful pause before speaking, the way her brow furrowed when concentrating. "You look just like him," James said softly, pulling out an old photograph. "Your father, I mean." Sarah studied the picture, two young men, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. "That's you and Dad?" she asked, tracing the image with her finger. "You were friends?" "Brothers," James corrected gently. "Thomas was my younger brother, which makes me your uncle. I'm sorry I didn't know about you sooner." Sarah's eyes widened, emotions flickering across her face: surprise, confusion, hurt, and something like hope. "Why didn't you ever come before?" "After they died." James felt the weight of those lost years crushing him. "I thought. I was told there were no survivors. Michael. He handled everything after the accident. He said you and your grandmother had died too." The revelation hung between them, heavy with implications. Sarah hugged her knees to her chest, processing this new information. "He lied," she whispered. "Why would he lie?" Before James could answer, his phone buzzed. His investigator had found something in the old case files: irregularities in the accident report, witness statements that had been buried, evidence that had conveniently disappeared. "Sarah," James said carefully, "I need to ask you something important. Do you remember anything about the night your parents died?" Sarah's face clouded. "Just rain. And bright lights. Sometimes I dream about screaming, but Grandma says that's normal after trauma." James nodded, making notes on his phone. Each piece of information was another thread in the tapestry of truth he was trying to weave, but he worried that pulling too hard at these threads might unravel Sarah's fragile peace. Back at the hospital, Martha watched their return with knowing eyes. "You told her," she said simply, "when Sarah went to get water." She needed to know, James replied. "Martha, why didn't you ever try to contact me?" Martha's face showed years of buried pain. "We did. For months after the accident, I wrote letters, made calls. But Michael always intercepted them. He said you wanted nothing to do with us, that you blamed Thomas for some corporate scandal." James felt sick. 5 years of separation, of Sarah growing up without family, of Martha struggling alone, all because of Michael's manipulation. "There's more," Martha added, her voice dropping to a whisper. "On the night of the accident, I was supposed to be in that car. I was feeling ill, so Emma stayed with me while Thomas went to meet you. She called me from the car, just before. She said Thomas had discovered something terrible. He had proof." A nurse entered to check Martha's vitals, interrupting the conversation, but James had heard enough. The pieces were starting to fit together: Thomas's urgent messages, Michael's convenient handling of the aftermath, the missing evidence. That evening, as James worked late in his office, pieces of a larger conspiracy began to emerge. The Foundation's fraudulent activities were just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the charitable facade, he found evidence of money laundering, connections to arms dealers, and a pattern of convenient accidents befalling anyone who asked too many questions. Most disturbing were the recent transfers, large sums moving through shell companies, preparations that looked increasingly like an escape plan. Michael was getting ready to run, which meant he knew his time was running out. James looked at the photo on his desk, him and Thomas in happier times. "I'll make this right," he promised, the smiling image of his brother. "I'll protect them this time." But even as he made this vow, surveillance cameras caught Michael entering the building's parking garage, his face set in grim determination. In his briefcase were documents that would shift all blame to James, carefully forged evidence that would make him appear to be the mastermind behind everything. The game was entering its final phase, and Michael Henderson had no intention of losing everything he'd built. If necessary, he would bury the truth along with anyone who tried to expose it. What he didn't count on was the strength of the bonds forming between James and Sarah, or the power of a child's determination to understand her past. As night fell over New York City, forces were in motion that would bring long-buried secrets into the light, forcing everyone to confront the truth they'd been avoiding for 5 years. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything, but who would survive to see the truth finally revealed remained to be seen. In her hospital bed, Martha clutched a sealed envelope containing her own testimony about that fateful night, wondering if she would live long enough to see justice done. Sarah's life at school became increasingly difficult as news of her connection to James Crawford spread. The whispers followed her through the hallways, some claiming she was a gold digger, others suggesting she had somehow tricked the billionaire. Even teachers began treating her differently, their faces a mixture of pity and suspicion. Rebecca Henderson, Michael's daughter and the school's queen bee, led the worst of the bullying. "My father says your parents were thieves," she taunted one day at lunch. "That's probably why they drove off that cliff. They were running from the police." Sarah's hands trembled, but she remembered her grandmother's words about dignity in the face of cruelty. Still, each day brought new torments. Her books disappeared, her locker was vandalized with cruel messages, and anonymous notes appeared on her desk suggesting she should join her parents. During one particularly brutal incident, Rebecca and her friends cornered Sarah in the bathroom. "You don't belong here anymore," Rebecca sneered, shoving Sarah against the wall. "My father says your uncle is going to jail, and you'll end up in foster care where you belong." But Sarah had learned strength from years of adversity. Standing her ground, she looked Rebecca in the eye. "My father was a good man. And unlike yours, he wasn't afraid of the truth." The punch caught Sarah by surprise, splitting her lip. As she tasted blood, something inside her snapped. Years of contained grief and anger exploded. When the teachers finally pulled them apart, both girls were bruised and crying, but Sarah felt strangely liberated. In the principal's office, the contrast between their situations became stark. Rebecca sat with an expensive lawyer her father had immediately sent, while Sarah waited alone until James could arrive from an important meeting. "This behavior is completely unacceptable," the principal declared, though his eyes lingered more on Sarah than Rebecca. "Violence has no place in our school." James entered then, his presence filling the room. Unlike Michael's lawyer with his rehearsed defenses, James simply asked Sarah to tell the truth about what happened. When she finished, including the weeks of bullying she'd endured in silence, James's face darkened with controlled anger. "If this school cannot protect its students from harassment," he said quietly, "perhaps we should be having a different conversation, one involving the school board and the media." The principal paled, suddenly remembering the Crawford family's influence on the school's funding. Rebecca's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, aware that his carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. But it was Sarah who surprised everyone. "I don't want special treatment," she said firmly. "I just want the truth to be known. My parents weren't thieves. They were heroes who died trying to expose real criminals." The room fell silent. In that moment, Sarah showed more grace and courage than anyone expected from a 12-year-old. Even Rebecca looked shaken, seeing her victim in a new light. That evening, as James drove Sarah home, she finally broke down. "Why do they hate us so much? We never did anything to them." James pulled the car over, turning to face his niece. Sometimes people lash out when they're afraid of the truth. Rebecca's father has filled her head with lies because he's desperate to protect himself. But lies don't last forever, Sarah. The truth always finds its way into the light. Sarah touched her split lip gently. Dad would have fought back too, wouldn't he? Yes, James smiled sadly, but he would have done it just like you did, with courage and dignity. You're so much like him, Sarah. He would be incredibly proud of you. The incident marked a turning point. Though the bullying didn't stop entirely, other students began standing up for Sarah. Her unwavering strength in the face of cruelty had earned their respect. Some even came forward with their own stories about Rebecca's bullying, creating a wave of support that surprised everyone. More importantly, Sarah's public defense of her parents' honor had drawn attention. Local newspapers picked up the story, and suddenly people were asking questions about the old accident. Why had the investigation been closed so quickly? Why were certain witnesses never interviewed? Michael Henderson, watching these developments from his office, realized his daughter's actions had backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating Sarah into silence, they had given her a platform. The truth he had worked so hard to bury was beginning to surface, one news story at a time. For Sarah, the cost of standing up for the truth was high but worth it. Each night she would tell her grandmother about the day's events while doing homework by Martha's hospital bed. Martha, though weakened by chemotherapy, drew strength from her granddaughter's courage. "You're fighting battles I should be fighting for you," Martha said one evening, stroking Sarah's hair. "We're fighting them together," Sarah replied, her split lip healing but her determination stronger than ever. "All of us, you, me, and Uncle James. And we're going to win." What neither of them knew was that their fight was about to become even more dangerous. Michael Henderson, seeing his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble, was preparing to take desperate measures. The truth might be powerful, but a cornered predator is at its most dangerous. The media scandal erupted like a volcano that had been building pressure for years. Headlines screamed across New York's newspapers: Crawford Enterprises charity fraud, mysterious death of Thomas Bennett accident or murder, billionaire James Crawford savior or conspirator. Public opinion divided sharply. Some saw James as a noble figure trying to right past wrongs, while others painted him as a manipulative businessman using a poor family for publicity. Social media exploded with theories, each more sensational than the last. Michael Henderson played his part masterfully, appearing on morning shows with carefully rehearsed concern. "James has been under tremendous stress," he would say, his voice heavy with fake sympathy. But his obsession with his brother's accident, his sudden fixation on this child, I fear he's losing touch with reality. But the campaign against James intensified. Anonymous sources leaked doctored emails suggesting he had orchestrated the original accident. Business partners began distancing themselves. Board members whispered about a vote of no confidence. Sarah watched in horror as the media circus grew. Reporters camped outside their apartment building, shouting questions whenever she tried to visit her grandmother in the hospital. "Is James Crawford really your uncle?" they would demand. "Did your father steal from the company?" Martha's condition worsened under the stress. Her doctors noticed concerning changes in her test results, but she refused to let Sarah stop visiting. "They can't take this from us too," she insisted, though her voice grew weaker each day. James faced his own battles in the corporate world. Major shareholders demanded explanations. The charity foundation's donors threatened to withdraw support. Even his most loyal executives began questioning his stability. During one particularly brutal board meeting, Michael played his masterstroke. He presented documents appearing to show James had been embezzling funds for years, using the foundation as his personal piggy bank. "It pains me to do this," Michael announced, his voice trembling with well-practiced emotion. "But as CFO, I have a responsibility to our shareholders. I recommend temporarily removing James from his position while we conduct a full investigation." The vote was unanimous. James Crawford, CEO of Crawford Enterprises, was suspended pending investigation. Security escorted him from the building he had built, past employees who averted their eyes. But even as Michael celebrated his apparent victory, cracks began appearing in his perfect facade. A junior accountant noticed discrepancies in the documents used to implicate James. A retired security guard came forward with memories of strange activities the night Thomas died. But most significantly, Sarah's story began resonating with the public. Her quiet dignity in the face of harassment, her unwavering defense of her parents' memory, touched people's hearts. Social media campaigns supporting the Crawford girl gained traction. James, stripped of his corporate power but not his resources, continued his investigation. He worked from home, connecting pieces of evidence, following money trails, and slowly building an irrefutable case against Michael. Martha, between treatments, provided crucial information about the night of the accident. "I saw Michael that night," she revealed. "He came to our house looking for Thomas, hours before the crash. He was angry, threatening. I never told anyone because I was afraid for Sarah." The truth began emerging in unexpected ways. Rebecca Henderson, shaken by her confrontation with Sarah, started asking her father uncomfortable questions. Michael's carefully maintained home life began showing strains. Journalists who initially attacked James started finding holes in Michael's story. The tide of public opinion gradually shifted. People began remembering Thomas Bennett's reputation for integrity, questioning why a trusted accountant would suddenly turn criminal. Through it all, Sarah showed remarkable resilience. She continued attending school despite the whispers, visited her grandmother daily despite the reporters, and stood firmly by James despite the accusations. "Why don't you hate me?" James asked her one evening, after another day of public humiliation. "I brought all this chaos into your life." Sarah looked at him with her father's steady gaze. "Because you're the only one who ever tried to find the truth. And the truth is worth fighting for, no matter what it costs." Those words would prove prophetic as the situation reached its breaking point. Michael, sensing his control slipping, prepared for one final, desperate gambit. He didn't plan to go down alone. If he fell, he would take everyone with him. Unknown to all, he had arranged for Martha's medical records to be altered, her treatment protocols accidentally modified. If he couldn't silence the truth through public opinion, he would silence it permanently. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose not just financial fraud, but murder, betrayal, and a conspiracy that had lasted half a decade. The question was no longer whether the truth would come out, but who would survive its revelation. As storm clouds gathered over New York City, 3 generations of courage, Martha's wisdom, Sarah's determination, and James's resources prepared for their final battle against a man who had already proven he would stop at nothing to keep his secrets buried. The media circus that had sought to destroy them would soon become the very platform for their vindication, but victory would come at a price none of them could have anticipated. Martha's condition deteriorated with frightening speed. What began as increased fatigue quickly spiraled into a medical emergency. The hospital monitors screamed warnings as her vital signs plummeted, sending medical staff rushing to her room. Sarah, who had been reading to her grandmother from a worn copy of Little Women, found herself pushed aside as doctors and nurses swarmed around Martha's bed. Through gaps in the medical team, she caught glimpses of her grandmother's pale face, the oxygen mask, the desperate attempts to stabilize her condition. "What's happening?" Sarah cried, her voice lost in the chaos. "Grandma? Grandma?" James arrived minutes later. Having broken every speed limit between his office and the hospital, he found Sarah huddled in the hallway, small fists pressed against her mouth to hold back sobs. The sight of his niece's terror-stricken face sent him immediately to the nurse's station, demanding answers. "Her tests showed improvement yesterday," James insisted. "How could this happen so suddenly?" The head nurse appeared equally bewildered, reviewing Martha's charts with growing concern. "These numbers don't make sense," she muttered. "The medication levels. Something's wrong." James's investigator, who had been quietly examining the hospital's records, appeared at his elbow. "Sir, you need to see this," he whispered, showing James his tablet. "Someone accessed Mrs. Bennett's medical records last night. The changes came from an outside terminal." A cold realization washed over James. This wasn't a natural decline, this was attempted murder. Michael was making his move, trying to silence Martha before she could testify about what she'd seen the night Thomas died. Inside Martha's room, the medical team worked frantically to counter the effects of what they now suspected was deliberate over-medication. Sarah refused to leave, holding her grandmother's hand and whispering desperate prayers. "Don't leave me," she pleaded. "Please, Grandma? You're all I have left. You promised you wouldn't leave me." Martha's eyes flickered open briefly, focusing on Sarah with tremendous effort. Her lips moved behind the oxygen mask, trying to form words. A nurse gently lifted the mask for a moment. "Safe. Deposit box," Martha whispered. "Your father's watch. The truth." Before Sarah could ask what she meant, Martha's eyes rolled back, and the monitors erupted in a new chorus of alarms. "Code Blue," someone shouted, and Sarah found herself being pulled from the room as the crash team rushed in with their defibrillator. In the hallway, James held Sarah as she broke down completely, her small body shaking with sobs. Through the window, they watched the medical team fighting to restart Martha's heart, each moment stretching into an eternity of fear. "Please, God," Sarah prayed, her face buried in James's suit jacket. "Please don't take her too. Please." The hospital's security team, alerted by James's investigator, began searching for any unauthorized personnel. Security footage showed a maintenance worker accessing the medical storage room at 3 a.m. Someone who, when the image was enhanced, bore a striking resemblance to one of Michael's known associates. James's phone buzzed with a text from his investigator Henderson, spotted leaving private airfield. Philippine Airlines flight. No extradition treaty. Michael was running, believing his final plan had succeeded. He hadn't counted on Martha's strength, or the dedication of the medical team, or most importantly, the power of a grandmother's love fighting to stay with her granddaughter. After what seemed like hours but was actually only minutes, the doctor emerged from Martha's room. His face was grave but held a glimmer of hope. "We've stabilized her," he announced, "but she's not out of danger. The next 24 hours will be critical. We're running tests to identify exactly what was administered to her." Sarah's legs gave out in relief, and James caught her before she could fall. But their relief was short-lived as hospital security reported finding evidence of tampering with the medicine storage systems. "This wasn't an accident," James told the doctor quietly, while Sarah sat by her grandmother's bed. "I need maximum security on this room. No one enters without being personally cleared by me." The doctor nodded, already reaching for his phone to contact hospital administration. The attempted murder of a patient would spark a major investigation. In her medically induced coma, Martha fought for her life, machines breathing for her, medications working to counteract the poison that had nearly killed her. Sarah refused to leave her side, maintaining a vigil that touched even the most hardened hospital staff. James stood at the window, watching the sun set over New York City. Michael might have escaped, but he had made a crucial mistake. In trying to silence Martha, he had instead galvanized their resolve. Whatever truth lay hidden in that safe deposit box and old watch, they would find it. More importantly, his attempt on Martha's life had crossed a line that would ensure his destruction. James could forgive many things, but not this, not an attack on the only family he had left. As night fell over the city, Martha's hospital room became a fortress, guarded by private security and police officers. Inside, Sarah held her grandmother's hand, whispering stories about their life together, willing her to keep fighting. The monitors beeped steadily, each sound a reminder that Martha Bennett was not done yet. She had survived poverty, loss, and hardship. She had raised her granddaughter with love and dignity despite overwhelming odds. She would not let Michael Henderson's poison be her end. The stage was set for the final act of their drama. But first, Martha had to survive the night, and with her, the truth that could bring down an empire built on lies. James Crawford's arrest came at dawn, as media cameras rolled and curious onlookers gathered. FBI agents led him from his home in handcuffs, his face stoic but pale. The charges were devastating: conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction of justice. Inside the FBI office, James sat in an interrogation room, still wearing his silk pajamas beneath his overcoat. The evidence against him seemed overwhelming. Security footage showed him entering the hospital's medical storage area. His fingerprints were found on tampered medication vials. Bank records showed suspicious transfers to offshore accounts. But all fabricated, James insisted to his lawyers. Michael's trying to frame me for his own crimes. But the prosecution's case seemed airtight. Michael Henderson had provided emails, documents, and testimony painting James as a man obsessed with his brother's death, willing to do anything to create a conspiracy where none existed. He even manipulated a grieving child, Michael told reporters, his face a perfect mask of concern, using his own niece to perpetuate this delusion about her parents' death. It's tragic, really. Sarah watched the news coverage from Martha's hospital room, her hands clenched into fists. "He's lying," she screamed at the television. "Uncle James would never hurt Grandma." But the world seemed determined to believe the worst. James's reputation, carefully built over decades, crumbled in hours. Former friends distanced themselves. Business associates gave damning interviews. Even his own board of directors voted to permanently remove him as CEO. The evidence mounted forged signatures on foundation documents matched James's handwriting. Security footage showed him meeting with suspicious characters. His own phone records seemed to implicate him in a series of threatening calls. In the detention center, James paced his cell, knowing Michael had outmaneuvered him. Every piece of evidence he'd gathered against Michael had mysteriously vanished. Every witness had suddenly changed their story or disappeared. Sarah, however, refused to give up. Despite her grandmother's critical condition and the media circus surrounding their family, she began her own investigation. She remembered Martha's last words about her father's watch and the safe deposit box. While the adults focused on high-tech evidence and financial records, Sarah thought like her father. Thomas Bennett had been old-fashioned, distrustful of computers. He would have kept physical proof. James's lawyers argued for bail, citing his community ties and philanthropic work. The prosecution countered with evidence suggesting he was a flight risk, producing tickets and fake passports found in his home, all expertly planted by Michael's team. The media feasted on every detail. "Crawford empire built on blood money," screamed one headline. "Billionaire's deadly obsession," declared another. Photos of James in handcuffs ran alongside old pictures of Thomas and Emma Bennett, creating a narrative of long-planned revenge. Michael Henderson, now acting CEO, appeared appropriately grave in interviews. "We're cooperating fully with authorities," he would say. The extent of James's deception shocked us all. Our hearts go out to young Sarah and her grandmother. In her hospital room, Martha fought for consciousness, aware somewhere in her sedated state that time was running out. The evidence that could exonerate James and convict Michael was hidden exactly where she'd tried to tell Sarah, but would anyone understand in time? James's preliminary hearing painted him as a manipulative sociopath. Prosecutors described how he'd allegedly orchestrated his brother's death, waited years to establish an alibi, then used Sarah and Martha to create sympathy for his revenge plot against Michael. The judge denied bail. James Crawford, once one of New York's most powerful men, was remanded to custody pending trial. As officers led him from the courtroom, he caught a glimpse of Sarah in the gallery, her face tear-stained but determined. "Be strong," he mouthed to her. "The truth will come out." but even his staunchest supporters began to doubt. The evidence seemed irrefutable. Video footage, financial records, witness statements all pointed to James's guilt. What nobody realized was that this elaborate frame-up would prove to be Michael's fatal mistake. In his determination to destroy James completely, he had overlooked one crucial detail: the unshakable faith of a 12-year-old girl in her uncle's innocence. Sarah, who had inherited her father's methodical mind and her mother's determination, began piecing together inconsistencies that the adults had missed. While the world focused on digital evidence and financial trails, she remembered her grandmother's words about old-fashioned proof. In his cell, James received a cryptic message from his niece. "Dad never trusted computers. Remember where you used to fish?" For the first time since his arrest, James smiled. Even from his cell, he could still help Sarah uncover the truth. The game wasn't over, it was just moving to a playing field Michael Henderson had never considered. The real evidence, the kind that couldn't be hacked or digitally altered, was waiting to be found. And Sarah Bennett, armed with her father's watch and a safe deposit box key, was about to change everything. Sarah's discovery of crucial evidence began with her father's old watch. While Martha remained in critical condition and James sat in jail, Sarah convinced Mrs. Rodriguez to help her access the family's safe deposit box at the local bank. Inside the dusty box lay Thomas Bennett's prized possession, an antique pocket watch with a hidden compartment. Sarah's fingers trembled as she opened it, finding a tiny SD card wrapped in a note written in her father's hand: the truth about Michael. Keep safe. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Rebecca Henderson, consumed by guilt over her role in bullying Sarah, had started secretly investigating her own father's activities. Late one night, she appeared at Martha's hospital room. "I found something in Dad's study," Rebecca whispered, hands shaking as she handed Sarah a phone. "He doesn't know I recorded him." The video showed Michael in his home office, drunk and ranting to someone on the phone. "Of course I killed Thomas Bennett. He was going to ruin everything. And if his daughter keeps digging, she'll meet the same fate. Just like her grandmother's accident in the hospital." Sarah's heart raced as she watched. This was the proof they needed, but she knew Michael would stop at nothing to destroy it. With Rebecca's help, she made copies, hiding them in various locations. Meanwhile, Martha began showing signs of consciousness. Her first coherent words stunned the attending nurse. "I saw him. The night Thomas died. Michael came to our house, threatened him. I have proof." The nurse, who had been secretly working for Michael, immediately reported this development. Michael realized his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. If Martha regained full consciousness and testified, combined with whatever evidence Sarah had found, his empire would crumble. Acting desperately, Michael ordered his remaining loyal associates to eliminate all threats simultaneously. Hitmen were dispatched to the hospital, the jail where James was held, and Sarah's location. But Sarah had anticipated this move. Working with Rebecca and James's loyal security team, she had set a trap. When Michael's men arrived at various locations, they found FBI agents waiting instead of their intended victims. The final confrontation occurred in Martha's hospital room. Michael himself, realizing everything was falling apart, decided to handle matters personally. He entered the hospital disguised as a doctor, easily bypassing security with fake credentials. But when he entered Martha's room, he found not only Sarah waiting, but also a fully conscious Martha, several FBI agents, and a live video feed broadcasting to every major news network. Rebecca stood beside Sarah, her phone recording everything. "It's over, Dad," Rebecca said quietly. "I won't let you hurt anyone else." Michael's composure finally cracked. In front of running cameras, he revealed everything: the years of fraud, Thomas's murder, the attempted killing of Martha, the frame-up of James. "You're just like your father," he snarled at Sarah. Too stupid to understand that sometimes people need to die for progress. "Thomas was weak, James was weak, and you're weak too." His confession, broadcast live across the country, left no room for doubt. FBI agents moved in to arrest him, but Michael had one final card to play. He pulled out a concealed weapon, aiming it at Sarah. "If I'm going down, I'm taking you with me," he growled. What happened next would be replayed on news channels for weeks. Martha, summoning strength nobody knew she had, threw herself in front of Sarah. Rebecca tackled her own father from behind. The gun went off, but the bullet hit only the ceiling as Michael was overwhelmed by FBI agents. As Michael was led away in handcuffs, cursing and threatening everyone, Sarah hugged her grandmother and her unlikely new friend. Martha, though exhausted, managed to smile. "Your parents would be so proud," she whispered to Sarah. Across town, in his jail cell, James watched the live broadcast with tears streaming down his face. His release would be ordered within hours, all charges dropped. The news crews captured everything: Michael's arrest, James's exoneration, the emotional reunion of the Crawford Bennett family. But most compelling was the image of two young girls, Sarah Bennett and Rebecca Henderson, holding hands as they faced the cameras together, proving that the sins of the father need not poison the hearts of their children. As night fell over New York City, a long-delayed justice was finally served. Michael Henderson's empire of lies crumbled, while the truth about Thomas and Emma Bennett's murder was finally revealed to the world. In Martha's hospital room, surrounded by family both old and new, Sarah held her father's watch close to her heart. The final battle had been won not with violence or money, but with courage, friendship, and an unwavering faith in the truth. Despite the triumph of Michael's arrest, fate had one more cruel twist in store. Martha's exposure to the tampered medications had done more damage than initially suspected. The strain of protecting Sarah during the final confrontation had depleted her remaining strength. Late one night, as Sarah dozed in the hospital chair beside her grandmother's bed, the monitors began their ominous warning. Martha's vital signs plummeted, sending medical staff rushing into action once again. "Her organs are shutting down," the doctor explained to James, who had just been released from jail. "The poison damaged her system more extensively than we realized. She's slipping into a coma." Sarah refused to leave her grandmother's side, her small hand clutching Martha's limp fingers. "Wake up, Grandma," she pleaded. "Please wake up. We won. Michael's going to jail. You can't leave now, please." But Martha remained unresponsive, the machines breathing for her, her face pale and still beneath the oxygen mask. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about making her comfortable and preparing for the worst. James watched helplessly as Sarah's world threatened to shatter again. The victory over Michael felt hollow in the face of this new tragedy. What good was justice if they lost Martha in the process? "She's the only mother I've ever really known," Sarah confided to James one night, her voice breaking. "After Mom and Dad died, she kept me going. She worked so hard, went hungry so I could eat, never complained. It's not fair. Why does everyone I love have to leave?" The hospital room became a vigil site. Rebecca visited daily, bringing flowers and sitting quietly with Sarah. Teachers sent cards and well wishes. Even Mrs. Rodriguez from their old apartment building came, bringing home cooked meals and prayers. Martha's doctors tried everything, but her condition continued to deteriorate. The poison had triggered a cascade of organ failures that modern medicine seemed powerless to stop. "Talk to her," the nurses encouraged. "She can still hear you, even in the coma." So Sarah read to her grandmother all their favorite books, old family stories, her school essays. She told Martha about her dreams for the future, about the foundation James planned to start in her parents' memory, about the friendship blooming between her and Rebecca. James arranged for the world's best specialist to examine Martha, but they all reached the same conclusion. The damage was too severe, too widespread. It was only a matter of time. "She held on long enough to see justice done," one doctor said gently. "Sometimes that's all that keeps people fighting." Sarah overheard this conversation and ran from the hospital, making it 3 blocks before James caught up with her. She beat her fists against his chest, screaming out years of accumulated grief and rage. "You promised," she sobbed. "You promised we'd be a family. How can we be a family if she dies? I can't lose her too. I can't. James held her until the storm passed, his own tears falling into her hair. When she had no energy left for crying, he carried her back to the hospital like the child she was, a child who had been forced to be strong for too long. In her hospital bed, Martha's breathing grew more labored. The machines beeped their steady, mechanical rhythm, but everyone could sense the growing weakness in their patient. Sarah climbed onto the bed beside her grandmother, careful not to disturb the tubes and wires. She laid her head on Martha's shoulder, the way she used to do during thunderstorms. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. For loving me, for protecting me, for teaching me to be brave. I promise I'll make you proud." As the sun set over New York City, casting long shadows through the hospital window, Martha Bennett slipped deeper into her coma. The woman who had faced poverty, loss, and danger with unshakable dignity was fighting her final battle. And Sarah, holding her grandmother's hand, faced the darkest night of her young life, wondering how many times one heart could break before it couldn't be put back together again. While Martha lay comatose, James faced the full impact of Michael's betrayal at Crawford Enterprises. The board of directors, though aware of his innocence, felt the company's reputation had been too severely damaged. They demanded his resignation. "It's not personal," James, the board chairman, explained during a tense meeting, "but the shareholders are nervous. The foundation scandal, the murder allegations, even though you've been cleared, the public's trust is shattered." James sat in his office one last time, boxing up 30 years of memories. Photos of him and Thomas in happier times, awards the paperweight Sarah had given him all seemed to mock him now. Michael Henderson might be going to prison, but he had succeeded in destroying everything James had built. The media circled like vultures, speculating about the future of Crawford Enterprises. Stock prices plummeted. Long-term clients began pulling their contracts. The charitable foundation, tainted by association with Michael's crimes, was forced to suspend operations, leaving hundreds of beneficiaries stranded. Crawford Empire crumbles, declared the Wall Street Journal. End of an era, proclaimed the New York Times. Television news ran endless analyses of the company's downfall, experts debating whether Crawford Enterprises could survive without its founding family at the helm. James's personal fortune, while still substantial, took a massive hit. The legal fees from his defense, combined with the stock market's reaction to the scandal, had wiped out nearly half his wealth. The Crawford name, once synonymous with business excellence, now carried the stain of controversy. Even his closest business associates distanced themselves. Invitations dried up. Phone calls went unreturned. The social circles that had once embraced him now closed ranks, treating him like a pariah despite his proven innocence. "They're cowards," Rebecca told him during one of her visits to the hospital. "Dad might have pulled the trigger, but they're the ones burying the body." The company James and Thomas had built from scratch was being dismantled piece by piece. The board appointed a new CEO who immediately began restructuring, a euphemism for dismantling the brothers' legacy. The hardest part was watching the layoffs. Loyal employees who had been with the company for decades found themselves suddenly unemployed. The charitable programs James had established were shuttered. The scholarship fund for underprivileged students, the medical assistance program, the affordable housing initiative, all casualties of the board's restructuring. James received a letter from a former employee. "My daughter could only attend college because of your scholarship program. Now she'll have to drop out. How many dreams will die because of one man's greed?" The weight of these consequences crushed James. He had survived Michael's attempt to frame him, but at what cost? The company that should have been Thomas's legacy, that should have passed to Sarah someday, was being stripped for parts by corporate raiders. In a final twist of irony, Michael Henderson's meticulous financial crimes had so thoroughly integrated with legitimate business operations that untangling them threatened to bankrupt the entire company. The board's solution was to sell off divisions, breaking up the enterprise the Crawford brothers had spent their lives building. James watched helplessly as vulture capitalists descended, picking apart the company's assets. The tower that bore his family name would soon belong to someone else. The employees who had trusted him would be scattered to the winds. During one particularly dark night at Martha's bedside, James confessed his failures to his comatose sister-in-law. "I couldn't protect Thomas. I couldn't save the company. I'm watching everything we built turn to dust. How can I be worthy of raising Sarah when I failed at everything else?" The silence of the hospital room offered no answers. Outside the window, the lights of New York City twinkled indifferently, the business world already moving on to the next scandal, the next fall from grace. The mighty Crawford empire, built over decades of hard work and integrity, had been destroyed in weeks by one man's malice. James realized that winning against Michael had cost him almost everything except the two things that mattered most: his freedom and his niece. As he sat in Martha's hospital room, watching Sarah sleep in the uncomfortable chair, James made a silent vow. He might have lost his company, but he wouldn't lose his family. Whatever happened next, he would protect Sarah and honor Thomas's memory, not through business success, but through love and dedication to the truth they had fought so hard to uncover. The empire was gone, but perhaps something more valuable could rise from its ashes if only Martha would wake up to see it. As Martha's condition deteriorated, the specter of foster care loomed over Sarah. Social services, following standard protocols, began making inquiries about her placement options. Despite James's intentions to adopt her, his recent legal troubles complicated the process. "We have concerns about placing her with you," the social worker explained during a meeting in the hospital corridor. "Your recent arrest, the company scandal, the ongoing media attention, it's not an ideal environment for a traumatized child." Sarah, overhearing this conversation, felt her world crumbling anew. "You can't take me away," she protested, stepping out from behind the door. "Uncle James is my only family. Please, you can't separate us two." The social worker's face softened with sympathy, but remained professionally firm. "We have to consider what's best for you, Sarah. There are some very nice foster families who specialize in cases like yours." James watched helplessly as Sarah's face crumpled. After everything they'd been through, after finally bringing Michael to justice, bureaucracy threatened to tear them apart. "In cases like mine," Sarah's voice shook with anger and fear. "You mean orphans whose parents were murdered? Children whose grandmothers were poisoned? Please, tell me about these special foster families who understand that." The hospital corridor fell silent, other visitors and staff pretending not to listen to this heart-wrenching scene. Rebecca, who had been bringing lunch, stopped short, her face pale with shock at the possibility of losing her new best friend. The social worker consulted her files, her voice carefully neutral. "There's a couple in Connecticut with experience handling high-profile cases. They could offer you privacy, stability, a fresh start away from all this media attention." A fresh start. Sarah's laugh was bitter beyond her years. "You mean hiding me away so everyone can forget what happened? Forget my parents, forget what Michael Henderson did?" James tried to intervene, but the social worker was already scheduling preliminary visits with potential foster families. The system's wheels were turning, indifferent to their personal drama. That night, Sarah refused to leave Martha's bedside, terrified that someone would take her away the moment she stepped out of the hospital. She curled up in the uncomfortable chair, dark circles under her eyes, jumping at every sound in the corridor. "But you promised we'd stay together," she whispered to her unconscious grandmother. "Please wake up. Please don't let them take me away." James's lawyers worked frantically to expedite the adoption process, but the recent scandal made everything more complicated. Character witnesses were hesitant to come forward, fearing association with the Crawford name. Even his substantial financial resources couldn't overcome the system's inherent caution. Rebecca, showing the same determination that had helped bring down her father, organized a social media campaign supporting James's adoption bid. Keep Sarah Home began trending, with thousands sharing stories of how the Crawford Bennett case had touched their lives. But social services remained unmoved. Public opinion cannot override protocol, they explained. The child's welfare must come first. The final blow came when they announced Sarah would begin transitional visits with the Connecticut family the following week. She would be moved to a temporary foster home until then, effectively separated from both her grandmother and James immediately. "I'll run away," Sarah declared, her father's stubborn determination shining in her eyes. "Every time they place me somewhere, I'll run right back here. They can't watch me forever." James held her as she cried, feeling the tremors of fear and rage running through her small body. They had fought so hard for justice, only to face losing each other to bureaucratic caution. In Martha's hospital room, the machines continued their rhythmic beeping, marking time as their small family faced dissolution. The woman who had held them together through poverty, crime, and tragedy lay silent, unable to protect her granddaughter one last time. Sarah spent that night making desperate plans which bus routes led back to New York, how much money she could save, where she could hide. At 12 years old, she was preparing to fight the entire foster care system alone. Outside the hospital, reporters continued their vigil, now eager to cover this new angle of the Crawford Bennett saga. Tragic Harris faces foster care became the new headline, Sarah's private pain once again public property. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah finally fell into an exhausted sleep, still clutching her grandmother's hand. James watched them both, his heart breaking anew. He had promised to protect her, to be the family she needed, but now faced the possibility of failing her just as he had failed Thomas. The social worker's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes what's legally right and what's morally right are different things the system designed to protect children threatened to inflict new wounds on an already traumatized child. Time was running out, and with each beep of Martha's monitors, their chances of remaining a family grew dimmer. The truth about Sarah's connection to James emerged from an unexpected source. As Martha lay comatose, Eleanor, James's elderly housekeeper, arrived at the hospital carrying a box of old photographs and letters she had kept hidden for years. "I should have spoken up sooner," Eleanor said, her hands trembling as she opened the box. "But I made a promise to your mother, Sarah. A promise I'm now breaking because she would want me to." Inside the box lay evidence that rewrote their family history. Photographs showed Emma Bennett, Sarah's mother, as a young girl alongside James and Thomas. Letters between Emma and James revealed a devastating secret: she had been their sister, adopted unofficially by the Crawfords' housekeeper after their parents' death. "Your mother was more than Thomas's wife," Eleanor explained, tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "She was James and Thomas's sister, which makes James not just your uncle by marriage, but your uncle by blood." Sarah stared at a photograph of her mother as a teenager, sandwiched between James and Thomas, all three laughing at some forgotten joke. The resemblance was undeniable: the same eyes, the same smile that Sarah saw in her own mirror. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" Sarah whispered, tracing her mother's face in the photo. Eleanor's explanation unfolded a tale of protection and sacrifice. The Crawfords' parents had died protecting Emma from the same criminal organization that Michael Henderson later joined. To keep her safe, they had hidden her true identity, raising her as their housekeeper's daughter. "Your mother only learned the truth when she fell in love with Thomas," Eleanor continued. "By then the danger had passed, but they decided to keep the secret to protect any children they might have. Only 5 people knew your parents: James, myself, and..." Martha, Sarah finished, looking at her grandmother's still form. "That's why she was so determined to protect me. She wasn't just protecting her son's child, she was protecting the last of the Crawford line." The revelation transformed everything. Social services could no longer deny James's right to custody. DNA tests quickly confirmed the family connection. More importantly, it gave Sarah something she had longed for: a deeper connection to her lost parents. Legal documents emerged from Eleanor's box, showing that Emma had prepared for every contingency. In case of her death, she had left proof of her identity and clear instructions that Sarah should know her true heritage when the time was right. "She wanted you to be proud of who you are," Eleanor said softly. "A Crawford and a Bennett, two families united by love and sacrifice." The news media, which had been hostile to James, suddenly shifted tone. The story of long-lost siblings, secret identities, and family sacrifice captured the public's imagination. Support for keeping Sarah with James grew overwhelming. James, still processing this revelation himself, found new photos being unearthed daily: Emma playing in the Crawford garden, helping Eleanor in the kitchen, growing from a scared orphan into a confident young woman. Each image was a gift, a piece of his sister he had forced himself to forget to maintain her cover. "I wanted to tell you so many times," he confessed to Sarah. "When I first saw you on that street, something in my heart recognized you. You have her spirit, her courage." Sarah spent hours poring over the contents of Eleanor's box, piecing together her mother's hidden life. She found diary entries describing Emma's joy at discovering her true identity, her love for Thomas, her hopes for her future child. The last entry, dated just days before the fatal accident, seemed prophetic: "If anything happens to us, Sarah will never be alone. She has a legacy of love from two families, and a strength she doesn't yet know she possesses." As the truth spread, more pieces fell into place. Martha's fierce protection of Sarah, James's instant connection to her, even Michael's desperate attempts to keep them apart, all made sense in light of this revelation. In her hospital bed, Martha's monitors showed a slight change: a strengthening heartbeat, a flutter of brain activity. Perhaps somewhere in her coma she too sensed that the final secret she had helped guard was finally bringing healing rather than harm. Sarah, surrounded by photographs of her newly expanded family history, felt a profound shift in her identity. She was no longer just the orphaned daughter of Thomas and Emma Bennett. She was the heir to a legacy of love, sacrifice, and courage that spanned two families and 3 generations. The Crawford blood in her veins helped explain the strength that had carried her through every trial. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore, she was fulfilling her family's legacy of standing up against evil, no matter the cost. Michael Henderson's confession came through a hidden recording that shocked the entire city. During his pre-trial detention, believing he was speaking privately with his lawyer, Michael revealed the full extent of his crimes in a moment of drunken arrogance. "The Crawfords were always too soft," his voice sneered on the recording. "James with his charities, Thomas with his ethics. Even little Emma, their secret sister, playing at being normal. They never understood that power is taken, not earned." The recording, secretly made by his own lawyer who had finally grown disgusted with his client's actions, laid bare a conspiracy spanning decades. Michael had been working with the same criminal organization that had killed the Crawford parents years ago, using the foundation to continue their operations. "I watched them for years," Michael continued on the tape. "Waited for the perfect moment. Thomas was the weak link, too honest for his own good. When he started digging into the foundation's books, he had to go. Emma was collateral damage." The confession detailed how he had orchestrated the car accident, tampered with evidence, and manipulated James's grief to gain control of the company. Each revelation was more damning than the last. "The girl was supposed to die in the crash," Michael's recorded voice said coldly. "Finding out she survived complicated things. But Martha's meddling cancer saved me the trouble of dealing with her until James had to play hero." The recording found its way to every major news outlet. Michael's own words condemned him more thoroughly than any investigation could have. His detailed admission of multiple murders, financial crimes, and ongoing criminal enterprises left no room for legal maneuvering. Most shocking was his revelation about Martha's illness. Cancer? Please. A few strategic chemical exposures in that dump they called an apartment. Slow-acting, untraceable. Should have killed her years ago, but the old woman's tougher than she looks. This confession sparked immediate medical intervention for Martha. Doctors, now aware they were dealing with deliberate poisoning rather than natural cancer, began targeted treatments to counteract the specific toxins Michael had used. The recording also exposed a network of corrupt officials who had helped cover up the original investigation into Thomas and Emma's death. Police officers, judges, and business leaders who had taken bribes found themselves facing federal charges. Money talks Michael had boasted on the tape. Everyone has a price. Well, almost everyone. Thomas wouldn't take the bribe. Said something about setting an example for his daughter, how noble, how dead. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted outside Michael's detention center. Former business associates rushed to cooperate with authorities, afraid of being implicated in his crimes. But his own legal team abandoned him, unable to mount any defense against his recorded confessions. Even his most loyal employees turned state's evidence, revealing additional crimes not covered in the recording. Rebecca, listening to her father's cold recitation of his crimes, finally understood the full extent of his evil. He was planning to kill me too, she realized, finding documents showing her trust fund was actually a life insurance policy with suspicious clauses. The most damaging revelation came at the end of the recording. Michael, drunk on both alcohol and his own sense of superiority, revealed his ultimate plan: the complete destruction of the Crawford legacy. James in prison, Martha dead, the company in ruins, and poor little Sarah in the foster system. It would have been perfect, he slurred. The final revenge against the family that never accepted that power matters more than principles. But his recorded gloating proved to be his undoing. Each admission, each detail of his crimes, strengthened the cases against him. Federal prosecutors added multiple charges, ensuring he would never see freedom again. The recording's impact rippled through New York's business community. Companies that had distanced themselves from Crawford Enterprises now rushed to restore ties. The board members who had forced James's resignation faced their own reckonings. For Sarah, hearing Michael's casual discussion of her parents' murder was devastating. But his admission that her grandmother's illness was his doing filled her with renewed hope. If Martha's condition was caused by poison rather than cancer, there was a chance she could recover. James, finally cleared of all suspicion, focused on undoing the damage Michael had caused. The recording proved that many of the company's legitimate charitable works had been real, untainted by Michael's schemes. As Michael Henderson's empire of lies crumbled, the truth he had tried so hard to bury emerged stronger than ever. His own words became the key to his destruction, proving that sometimes the greatest weapon against evil is simply letting it speak for itself. The recording ended with words that would haunt Michael forever. The Crawfords never understood that love makes you weak. That's why I won. But as he sat in his cell, watching his carefully constructed world collapse, he finally learned how wrong he had been. The truth about the past accident emerged with devastating clarity when the old evidence finally came to light. Sarah, following her father's cryptic clue about the fishing spot, convinced James to take her to the old oak tree where he and Thomas had spent their childhood summers. Dad never trusted computers, Sarah explained as they dug beneath the ancient tree. He would have wanted something physical, something that couldn't be hacked or deleted. Their discovery exceeded all expectations. Buried in a waterproof container were documents, photographs, and a video recording Thomas had made the night before his death. The evidence painted a complete picture of Michael's crimes and the lengths he had gone to cover them up. The video showed Thomas speaking directly to the camera. James, if you're watching this, I'm probably dead. I've discovered something terrible about Michael. He's been using our foundation to launder money for the same people who killed our parents and threatened Emma. The recording continued, showing Thomas methodically presenting evidence of Michael's crimes, bank statements, offshore accounts, fake charities, and most damning of all, proof that Michael had been orchestrating accidents for anyone who threatened to expose him. "I'm leaving this where only family would think to look," Thomas explained. "Sarah, if you're watching this someday, know that everything your mother and I did was to protect you. James, I trust you'll know what to do with this information." Martha's role in the story became clear as well. She had been the one who helped Thomas hide the evidence, knowing it might be needed someday. Her subsequent silence had been motivated not by fear, but by a promise to protect Sarah until the right time came. The evidence included photographs of Michael meeting with known criminals, recordings of threatening phone calls, and detailed documentation of his illegal operations. Thomas had been thorough, knowing his life might depend on the completeness of his investigation. Most shocking was the revelation about the night of the accident. Thomas hadn't been driving to meet James, as everyone believed. He had been lured out by Michael under false pretenses, with Emma insisting on accompanying him despite his protests. If anything happens to us, Emma's voice could be heard in the background of Thomas's recording. Martha knows where to find this. And Sarah will have the strength to finish what we started. The evidence was overwhelming. Federal prosecutors called it the most complete documentation of corporate criminal activity they had ever seen. Thomas, knowing he might not survive his confrontation with Michael, had created an unassailable case against him. But Sarah watched the video of her parents repeatedly drinking in their images, their voices, their love for her shining through even as they faced mortal danger. For the first time, she truly understood the magnitude of their sacrifice and their courage. James, seeing his brother and sister's final messages, found himself overwhelmed with both grief and pride. They had died protecting not just the truth, but the future they dreamed of for their daughter. The oak tree evidence provided the final pieces needed to dismantle what remained of Michael's criminal empire. Each document, each recording, each photograph exposed another layer of corruption and violence that had been hidden behind a veneer of corporate respectability. Martha, still in her coma, had left her own testimony. In a letter found among Thomas's documents, she detailed everything she had witnessed the night of the accident, including Michael's threats and his subsequent attempts to silence her through intimidation. The truth hit New York's business community like a tsunami. Companies that had participated in Michael's schemes, knowingly or unknowingly, faced federal investigation. The exposure extended to corrupt politicians, judges, and law enforcement officials who had helped cover up his crimes. But perhaps the most meaningful revelation was personal rather than criminal. In a sealed envelope marked for Sarah, Thomas and Emma had left a letter for their daughter. "Dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, we're no longer with you, but know that everything we did, every risk we took, was to ensure you would grow up in a world where truth matters more than power, where love is stronger than fear. You are our greatest achievement, our deepest love, our lasting hope. You carry within you the strength of the Crawfords and the courage of the Bennetts. Never doubt that you are worth every sacrifice. Trust James. He'll understand when the time is right. And remember that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in fighting evil, but in refusing to let it make you afraid to love. All our love. Mom and Dad." The truth, buried beneath an old oak tree, had finally emerged into the light. Thomas and Emma's final act of love had not only ensured justice would eventually be served, but had also preserved the family bonds that Michael had tried so hard to destroy. Justice arrived not with a bang, but with a series of quiet victories. Michael Henderson's trial was swift and decisive, his own recorded confession leaving no room for legal maneuvering. The judge's sentence was unprecedented, multiple life terms with no possibility of parole. Martha's recovery, once the correct treatment for poisoning was administered, amazed her doctors. Color returned to her cheeks, strength to her limbs. The day she finally opened her eyes, Sarah was reading from their favorite book, and James was discussing plans for rebuilding the company. "Did we win?" were Martha's first whispered words. "Yes, Grandma Sarah answered, tears streaming down her face. We won everything. The recovery of the Crawford Bennett family mirrored Martha's healing. With Michael's poisoning exposed and treated, Martha grew stronger each day. The doctors called it miraculous, Sarah called it justice. James's reputation was fully restored, with public apologies from those who had doubted him. The board of Crawford Enterprises, facing pressure from shareholders and the public, begged him to return as CEO. He accepted, but with conditions that would transform the company. The most significant change was the establishment of the Thomas and Emma Bennett Foundation for Corporate Ethics. The foundation would train whistleblowers, protect corporate truth-tellers, and provide support for families affected by corporate crime. My brother and sister died protecting the truth, James announced at the foundation's launch. Their legacy will be ensuring no other family faces that choice alone. Sarah, standing beside her uncle at the podium, spoke with a poise beyond her years. My parents believed that doing what's right matters more than doing what's right and what's safe. Their courage will now help others find their own. Martha, watching from her wheelchair but growing stronger every day, felt pride overwhelm her. Her family had not only survived but had transformed their tragedy into a force for good. The truth about Emma being the Crawford sister became a story of hope rather than scandal. News outlets celebrated the family's reunion even as they reported on Michael's crimes. The narrative shifted from corporate corruption to family resilience. Rebecca, who had testified against her father without hesitation, found a new family in the people her father had tried to destroy. Her friendship with Sarah deepened into a sisterly bond, proving that children need not inherit their parents' sins. As spring arrived in New York City, the Crawford Bennett family began their new life together. Martha moved into James's penthouse, her medical care continuing but her recovery steady. Sarah's adoption was finalized, officially making her James's daughter while preserving her Bennett heritage. The old apartment building where Sarah and Martha had struggled for so long was purchased by the foundation. James transformed it into affordable housing for families in need, ensuring that others would find help where his family had once known hardship. Justice had been served, but more importantly, love had triumphed over hate, truth over lies, family over greed. The Crawford Bennett legacy would no longer be one of tragedy, but of transformation. The family reunion and healing brought changes that rippled through their lives like waves in a still pond. James reorganized Crawford Enterprises with a new focus on ethical business practices and corporate responsibility. The company's first major project was establishing a scholarship fund in Thomas and Emma's names, providing education opportunities for children from underprivileged backgrounds. But Martha's recovery continued to amaze her medical team. Through physical therapy and sheer determination, she progressed from wheelchair to walker to walking independently. Her doctors documented her case extensively, using the lessons learned from treating Michael's poison to help other victims of corporate crimes. Sarah flourished in her new life, while never forgetting where she came from. She insisted on volunteering at her old neighborhood's community center, tutoring children facing the same challenges she had overcome. Her story became an inspiration, proving that circumstances need not define destiny. But success means nothing if we forget to help others, she often said, echoing her parents' values. Rebecca, finding her own path to redemption, worked alongside Sarah at the community center. The girls' friendship became a symbol of healing, showing that the next generation could break cycles of hatred and greed. The Thomas and Emma Bennett Foundation grew beyond its initial scope, becoming a powerful force for corporate reform. Its whistleblower protection program saved lives and exposed corruption across multiple industries. Each victory was a tribute to the courage that had started with one family's stand for truth. Martha, once she regained her strength, became a fierce advocate for healthcare reform, using her experience to fight for better protection for vulnerable patients. Her testimony before Congress about Michael's poisoning scheme led to new laws protecting patients from medical fraud. James found that running a truly ethical corporation not only felt right but proved profitable. Crawford Enterprises became a model for corporate responsibility, proving that success and integrity could coexist. Other companies began following their lead, creating a shift in corporate culture. The old apartment building, now renovated and renamed the Bennett House, provided safe homes for dozens of families. Each apartment included access to educational resources, healthcare assistance, and job training programs. It became a model for similar projects across the city. Sarah and Rebecca established a peer support group for children affected by corporate crimes, creating a safe space for young people to share their experiences and find strength in unity. Their initiative spread to other cities, helping countless families heal from similar traumas. The family story became part of business school curricula, teaching future leaders about the importance of ethical leadership and the true cost of corporate corruption. James was frequently invited to speak about corporate responsibility, always bringing Sarah along to share their family's perspective. Together, they had not only survived tragedy but had transformed it into triumph. Their healing became a catalyst for positive change, proving that even the darkest experiences could lead to light. The Crawford-Bennett family demonstrated that true success lies not in wealth or power, but in using whatever resources you have to help others. Their legacy would be measured not in dollars, but in lives transformed and hope restored. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning, Sarah stood at her parents' graves, placing fresh flowers beside the polished headstones. At 17, she had grown into a poised young woman who carried her family's legacy with grace and determination. "You'd be proud of her," James said to the graves, standing beside his niece. "She's everything you hoped she would become, and more." Martha, now fully recovered and vibrant at 70, nodded in agreement. She has Thomas's integrity and Emma's heart, and a strength all her own. The Crawford-Bennett Foundation had become one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country, known for its unwavering commitment to corporate ethics and social justice. Sarah had already begun taking an active role, determined to continue her parents' work. Rebecca, who had become like a sister to Sarah, joined them at the cemetery. The girls' friendship had become a symbol of redemption, proving that the sins of the fathers need not poison their children's futures. Sometimes Sarah said, touching the engraved names of her parents, "I think everything that happened was meant to bring us all together, to finish what Mom and Dad started." Michael Henderson's empire had crumbled completely, his crimes exposed, his influence destroyed. From his prison cell, he watched as everything he had built through corruption was transformed into forces for good by the very family he had tried to destroy. The Crawford name, once tainted by scandal, now stood for integrity and compassion. James had rebuilt the company on a foundation of ethical business practices, proving that profit and principle could coexist. Martha's experience had led to major reforms in patient protection laws, saving countless lives. The Bennett House had spawned similar projects across the country, offering hope and opportunity to families in need. But perhaps the most profound change was in the small moments: Sarah and Rebecca tutoring children at the community center, Martha baking cookies for neighborhood kids, James mentoring young entrepreneurs committed to ethical business practices. "Your parents dreamed of a world where doing right mattered more than being rich," Martha told Sarah, embracing her granddaughter. "You've helped make that dream real." The family they had become, James, Martha, Sarah, and Rebecca, proved that love could triumph over greed, truth over deception, justice over power. Their story became a testament to the enduring strength of family bonds, whether forged by blood or choice. As they left the cemetery that day, Sarah took one last look at her parents' graves. The morning sun caught the words engraved beneath their names, "Love conquers all." "Ready to go home?" James asked, putting an arm around his niece's shoulders. Sarah nodded, smiling through her tears. Home wasn't just a place anymore, it was the family they had built, the legacy they protected, and the future they would forge together. They had not only survived tragedy but had transformed it into triumph. In doing so, they had proven that the greatest victory isn't in defeating evil, but in refusing to let it change who you are. The Crawford Bennett family had become living proof that love, truth, and courage could overcome any obstacle. Their story would inspire generations to come, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope endures and justice prevails. Thank you for joining us for this touching story of family justice and redemption. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about the Crawford Bennett family's journey. What moments resonated with you the most? How did their story of courage and perseverance impact you? Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories that touch the heart and soul. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful content. Share this video with friends and family who might find inspiration in this tale of triumph over adversity. Don't forget to like and leave your comments below. Your engagement means the world to us and helps our storytelling community grow stronger. Together we can share more stories that remind us of the power of love, truth, and family.